The room went silent before anyone even understood why. Not because someone shouted, not because security intervened, but because a man who clearly didn't belong in that restaurant quietly said 5 words. "She's with me." And when he did, the millionaire heiress standing beside the table suddenly stopped breathing, because the little girl everyone had been ignoring was the one person she had spent 15 years trying to forget. The restaurant sat 48 floors above Manhattan, a private dining room reserved for the most powerful investors in the country. Mahogany walls, crystal chandeliers, wine lists worth more than most people's rent. And at the center table that night sat Charlotte Whitmore, 34 years old, heir to a billion-dollar technology empire built by her father, Henry Whitmore. For the past decade, magazines had called her one of the most powerful women in American finance. But power has a strange way of hiding old secrets. And on this particular evening, those secrets were about to walk straight through the front door, holding the hand of a quiet man and a little girl with a paper gift bag. By the end of the night, the entire room would realize something terrifying. Charlotte Whitmore hadn't just made enemies in business. She had made them in places no amount of money could erase. Because what happened next raises questions that still linger today. Questions investigators would later ask. Questions journalists would spend months trying to answer. Questions like, who was the little girl? Why did the single father know Charlotte Whitmore's name before she even introduced herself? And most importantly, what happened 15 years earlier that made a billionaire heiress freeze in front of an entire room of witnesses? To understand that moment, we have to go back to a small town in Ohio, back to a man who had never set foot in Manhattan, and a secret that began long before anyone in that room realized it. Daniel Harper had never been the type of man who chased attention. 41 years old, a mechanic by trade, raised in Dayton, Ohio, the kind of place where people know their neighbors, and reputations last longer than paychecks. Daniel lived a quiet life. One small house, one pickup truck, and one daughter, 8-year-old Lily. Neighbors described Lily the same way every time. Curious, polite, always asking questions, always carrying around a small notebook where she drew pictures of places she wanted to see someday. New York, the ocean, skyscrapers, things most children from Dayton only saw on television. Daniel encouraged those dreams the only way he knew how, working longer hours, saving every spare dollar, trying to give Lily a future bigger than the one he had inherited. But there was something unusual about Lily, something Daniel rarely talked about, something connected to a woman who had once lived in Dayton before she disappeared into a world of money and power. A woman named Charlotte Whitmore. By the time Charlotte Whitmore turned 34, she had already accomplished something most CEOs spend entire careers chasing. Control, not just over a company, but over an empire. Whitmore Technologies had grown into a giant in cloud computing and defense infrastructure, government contracts, satellite communications, artificial intelligence research, the kind of business where decisions made in private boardrooms could shape entire industries. And Charlotte ran it all with the quiet confidence of someone raised inside power. To the outside world, her life looked perfect. Private jets, charity galas, interviews with financial networks. But people who worked closely with Charlotte noticed something else. Something subtle. She never stayed in one city too long. She avoided questions about her early 20s. And there was one place she never returned to. Dayton, Ohio. The town where her father first built his company. The town where she once lived before inheriting everything. The town where Daniel Harper still lived. The dinner began like every other high-level investor meeting. Quiet conversations. Wine glasses clinking softly against polished wood. Charlotte Whitmore sat at the head of the table reviewing a proposal worth nearly $200 million. No one in the room expected interruptions, especially not from the lobby downstairs, where a tired man and a small girl were speaking calmly with the host. Security initially assumed they were lost. This wasn't a restaurant that welcomed walk-ins. Reservations were made weeks in advance. And yet, Daniel Harper wasn't asking for a table. He was asking for Charlotte Whitmore, by name. That alone was unusual. But what he said next made the host hesitate. Because Daniel didn't sound angry or desperate. He sounded certain. And when the elevator doors finally opened upstairs, no one inside that dining room realized they were about to witness something that would ripple far beyond that building. Something that would force Charlotte Whitmore to confront a past she had carefully buried. And it all started When Lily accidentally dropped her glass, the champagne flute slipped from Lily's fingers, shattering against marble. The sound was small, but in a silent room it might as well have been thunder. Every head turned. Executives, investors, waitstaff frozen mid-step, and Charlotte Whitmore looked up from her documents. For a moment, she didn't recognize the man standing beside the girl, but Daniel recognized her instantly. 15 years had passed, but some memories don't age. He stepped forward calmly, placed a hand on Lily's shoulder, and said the words that would stop the entire room. "She's with me." The sentence was simple, but Charlotte's reaction wasn't. Because the moment she saw the girl's face, something inside her expression changed. Not confusion, not annoyance, recognition, and fear. In the weeks that followed, journalists began asking questions. How did a mechanic from Ohio walk into a private Manhattan investor dinner? Why did Charlotte Whitmore immediately cancel the meeting afterward? And why did security footage show her leaving the restaurant? With Daniel Harper and his daughter? No one inside the company offered answers. But one detail quickly caught reporters' attention. Lily Harper had the same birthday as an event that disappeared from Charlotte Whitmore's public biography. A year she never spoke about. Some believed Daniel Harper was blackmailing her. Others suspected a long-buried lawsuit. A few journalists even suggested corporate espionage. But those theories ignored one simple fact. Daniel Harper had never asked for money, never threatened legal action, never spoken to the press. He had asked for one thing: a conversation. The truth began to surface when a former Whitmore employee contacted reporters. A woman who had worked for Charlotte 15 years earlier, in Dayton, back when Whitmore Technologies was still a small startup. She remembered something unusual: a sudden disappearance, a private hospital visit, and a legal document signed quietly, just weeks later. Because the girl everyone had ignored in that restaurant wasn't just a stranger. She was a living reminder of a decision Charlotte Whitmore made 15 years earlier. A decision involving a child she believed would never find her. But secrets have a strange way of surviving. And sometimes, they walk straight into the room, holding your hand. So here's the question. If you were Charlotte Whitmore, would you have faced the truth that night? Or would you have tried to keep the past buried forever? Let us know what you think. And if this story surprised you, the next one might leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about power, loyalty, and the price of silence. The year Charlotte Whitmore never talked about was 2010. At the time, Whitmore Technologies was barely surviving. Her father's company was drowning in debt. Investors were leaving. And Charlotte, then just 19 years old, was studying computer engineering while trying to help save the family business. But according to records discovered later, that year didn't just involve financial pressure. It involved a secret hospital visit, a visit that appeared in medical logs, but nowhere else in her public history. Former employees remember Charlotte disappearing for several weeks. When she returned, no explanation was offered, and within months, the company relocated its headquarters, leaving Dayton behind entirely. For most people, that would have been the end of the story. But for Daniel Harper, that year changed his life forever. Daniel Harper first met Charlotte Whitmore on a rainy highway outside Dayton. Not at a gala, not in a boardroom, but on the side of the road, next to a broken-down car. Charlotte had been driving back from the university when her engine failed. Daniel stopped to help. At the time, he had no idea who she was. To him, she was just a young woman stranded alone in the rain. They talked while he repaired the engine. And something unexpected happened. Over the following months, they continued seeing each other. Quiet dinners, late-night conversations. Two young people living very different lives, but sharing the same uncertainty about the future. And then, everything changed. Because Charlotte discovered she was pregnant. For Daniel, the news was overwhelming, but not unwelcome. He had grown up believing family was everything. For Charlotte, the situation looked very different. Her father had just secured a massive investment deal. Whitmore Technologies was finally expanding. And a pregnancy, especially one involving someone outside her social world, could destroy the carefully crafted image surrounding the company. According to the former employee who later spoke to journalists, Charlotte made a decision. A private legal agreement. One that would ensure the child could live safely, but far away from the Whitmore name. Daniel would raise the baby, alone, and Charlotte would disappear from their lives. Completely. At least, that was the plan. For 15 years, Daniel Harper kept his promise. He never contacted Charlotte Whitmore, never asked for money, never told Lily the truth. To Lily, her mother was simply someone who couldn't stay, and Daniel made sure she never felt abandoned. He worked longer hours, missed sleep, saved every dollar he could. But there was one thing he never expected. Lily was growing up, looking exactly like Charlotte. The same eyes, the same expression, and eventually, the same curiosity about where she came from. By the time Lily turned 8, she had started asking questions Daniel could no longer avoid. Questions like, "Who is my mom?" For years he avoided the answer, until one moment changed everything. One afternoon, Lily found something online, a magazine interview with Charlotte Whitmore. The headline read, "America's youngest tech billionaire." The photograph showed Charlotte standing beside the same company her father once struggled to build. Lily stared at the image. Then she looked at Daniel. Children notice things adults sometimes ignore. The resemblance was impossible to miss. That night, Daniel made the decision he had avoided for nearly a decade. He would take Lily to New York, not for money, not for revenge, but for the truth. And that decision led them straight into the restaurant, where Charlotte Whitmore finally saw the daughter she had spent 15 years pretending didn't exist. When Charlotte stepped outside the restaurant with Daniel and Lily, the city below them stretched into darkness. For several seconds, no one spoke. Then Lily did something no adult expected. She handed Charlotte the small paper gift bag. Inside was a drawing, a crayon sketch of 3 people holding hands. Above them, Lily had written 3 words, "Maybe someday, family." Charlotte stared at the drawing longer than anyone expected, because in that moment, the billionaire heiress wasn't thinking about investors, or reputation, or business deals. She was remembering a 19-year-old version of herself, who believed she could outrun the consequences of a single decision. But some choices follow you forever. What happened next was never announced publicly. There were no press releases, no interviews. But several months later, Whitmore Technologies quietly opened a new foundation, focused entirely on supporting single parents and children. And in Dayton, Ohio, Daniel Harper's house received something unexpected, a handwritten letter, not from a lawyer, not from a corporation, but from Charlotte Whitmore herself. Inside the envelope was a photograph, taken weeks after that dinner. Charlotte, Daniel, and Lily, standing together for the first time. In business, people talk about power as if it's measured in money, in influence, in control. But sometimes the most powerful moment in someone's life happens when they finally stop running from the past. Because 15 years earlier, Charlotte Whitmore believed she could leave one decision behind forever. But on a quiet night in Manhattan, a little girl walked into a restaurant, dropped a glass, and reminded one of the most powerful women in America that some truths never disappear. They simply wait until the moment you're finally ready to face them. So what do you think? If you were in Charlotte Whitmore's position, would you have made the same decision 15 years ago? Or would you have chosen a different path entirely? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Because sometimes, the most complicated stories aren't about crime. They're about the choices people make when no one else is watching.